Now that we've done a formal set command versus how do we create informal to commands, we're going to be doing examples of informal to commands to practice with it. So we remember that whenever we do formal usted commands, the affirmative and negative commands, the verb portion of it stays the same. But whenever we do informal to commands, if we have an affirmative command and a negative command, the verb portion is going to change. So if you would like to re-look at that video so that you remember how to form informal to commands, please do so. But I have put 4 examples behind me of different kinds of verbs so that we can see kind of what might happen if we have a regular verb or a stem change verb or whatever. So here we go. Obviously, we're going to have to do the affirmative and the negative command for each. In case you can't see it perfectly, I'll be reading everything out loud. So our first command that we want to make is buy the books. And then we're going to change it to don't buy the books. So the affirmative command, buy the books. The negative command, don't buy the books. Again, all of these are examples of informal to commands. So we have buy the books, don't buy the books. How do we say the verb to buy? The verb is comprar. C-O-M-P-R-A-R. That is our verb, comprar, to buy, that we're going to need to make an affirmative and a negative informal to command. So I have left a blank in each of these sentences where our command, whether it's affirmative or negative, will go. And obviously, if we're talking about the books, you can see here that the books, los libros. So if I want to say buy the books and I want to make an affirmative informal to command, what would I have to do? We looked at in a prior video what we would have to do to make an affirmative command. So we have 2 options. We can either go to the present tense. Remember, we're talking about affirmative informal to commands. We can either go to the present tense and just steal the él, ella, usted conjugation, also known as the third person singular conjugation of the verb comprar, or we could choose to do option 2 or option B or whatever to get to affirmative informal to commands, which would be to go back to the present tense and take the to conjugation, so the second person singular, the to conjugation, but then drop the S from the back of that, the end of that. And no matter which route we take, we're going to end up at the same answer. So if we're thinking about the verb comprar that we need to use in the sentence with buy the books, my affirmative informal to command, then if I chose route A or option A for getting to an affirmative command, I might go through and do a whole conjugation box for the verb comprar in the present tense. So I would have yo compro, tú compras, él, ella, usted compra, etc. So we know if we want to choose option A, which is just stealing the él, ella, usted, what would it be? Compra, C-O-M-P-R-A, would be my affirmative informal to command for the verb comprar. I'll write up there in a second. But if we're just stealing that from option A to get there, we would have C-O-M-P-R-A. If we wanted to choose option B, route 2, to get to an affirmative informal to command, what would we do? We could go to the to conjugation, which is of the present tense, which is compras, C-O-M-P-R-A-S, and then do what? Drop the S. In either one of those cases, we would end up with compra. So that's what I'm going to plug in, fill in the blank as my affirmative informal to command. Compra, C-O-M-P-R-A. Compra, C-O-M-P-R-A. Compra los libros, buy the books. But then if I wanted to say, don't buy the books, that for some students will become a little bit more difficult or prove to be a little bit more difficult, because remember that the starting point for making negative informal to commands is first you have to know how to make the formal usted command, and then you have to do what? Add an S to it. So how do we make the formal usted command with the verb comprar? Just talking through this, because we already had lessons on this before, talking through it and not writing it down, but try to like kind of think ahead of me and figure out if you could figure out on your own. If I know that to make a negative informal to command, that my starting point is making a formal usted command, how do we do that? Step one would be, I take it back to the yo conjugation of the present tense, and I would get compro, C-O-M-P-R-O. Step two is I would drop the O, so I would have C-O-M-P-R. And then step number three is to add an opposite ending. Since comprar is an AR verb, my opposite ending to make a formal usted command would be the letter E. So if I wanted to make a formal usted command with the verb comprar, it would be compre, C-O-M-P-R-E. But is that where I stop here now that I want to make a negative informal to command? No, there's one more step. I have to add an S on the end. So my negative informal to command would be compres. Remember, coming from my starting point of the formal usted command, compre, C-O-M-P-R-E, and then adding an S to turn it into a negative informal to command. So I will fill that in the blank, C-O-M-P-R-E-S. Obviously, with the word no in front. So again, buy the books, informal to command would be compra los libros. Negative informal to command will be no compres los libros. Compra, C-O-M-P-R-A, no compres, C-O-M-P-R-E-S. So we have compra los libros, buy the books. No compres los libros, don't buy the books. That happens to be just a regular happy verb. The next verb, aprender, means to learn. Our sentence is learn Spanish for our affirmative command. Then we're going to turn it into a negative command. You know what? Forget about it. Don't learn Spanish. Remember, we're still doing informal to command. So we have learn Spanish and don't learn Spanish. The verb to learn, aprender, the verb to learn, aprender, as I walk you through it before we fill in the blanks, it means to learn. Aprender is an ER verb. Aprender is also a regular happy verb. It doesn't do anything weird. It's not stem change or spell change or anything. So we have learn Spanish as our affirmative informal to command. Then we're going to have don't learn Spanish for our negative informal to command. And we're working with the verb aprender. So we remember we have two ways to get to the affirmative informal to command. And option one would be, I guess the best way to do this might be just to do all or a lot of the whole conjugation box for the verb aprender, to learn in Spanish. So we will have yo aprendo, tú aprendes, él, ella, usted aprende, etc. So if we took option A to make an affirmative informal to command, we would just steal the third person singular conjugation. So we would just steal the aprende, A-P-R-E-N-D-E, and plunk it down, and we would have our affirmative command. Or if we chose option 2, option B, we would take the tu conjugation, the second person singular, which is aprendes in the present tense, and we would do what? Drop the S, and we would end up with A-P-R-E-N-D-E-S, drop the S. So in either one of the cases, we would end up with aprende, A-P-R-E-N-D-E. So I will throw that down. So I am giving you the command, affirmative command, aprende español, aprende español. Remember, informal to command, affirmative with the verb aprender, aprende español. No matter whether we chose route A or route B, we get the same answer. For the negative informal to command with the verb aprender, to say, you know what, never mind, don't learn Spanish. Learn French or whatever. If I wanted to make the negative, our starting point, we remember, is first we have to form the formal usted command, and then we have to add an S to the end of it. So if I go through the steps, just talking us through it, we have to make the formal usted command, add an S. So step number 1 of making a formal usted command is go back to the yo conjugation of the present tense, aprendo, A-P-R-E-N-D-O. Step 2, drop the O. Step 3, add opposite endings. Since aprender is an ER verb, opposite ending, that letter we would add would be an A. We would end up, if we were just stopping there and just making formal usted command, we would end up with A-P-R-E-N-D-A, but we're not done, because the second step to making an informal to command is take the formal command and then add what? Add an S. So we will end up with aprendas, obviously with the word no in front of it, aprendas, and it will be spelled A-P-R-E-N-D-A-S after we add that S onto the formal command. So I will throw that down. So if I wanted to say to you, hey, learn Spanish, my affirmative informal to command to a student would be aprende español, right here. And you say, no, you know, I don't really like Spanish. I'm just in this class to graduate, or I don't know. I would say, well, then don't worry about it. Then don't learn Spanish. Don't learn Spanish. My negative informal to command will be no aprendas español. No aprendas español. And it will be A-P-R-E-N-D-A-S. No aprendas español. Then we come over here. These are both regular happy verbs where nothing weird happens. There's no spell change, no stem change, nothing like that. And then, so we're going to practice with a stem change verb. And I have given you the verb cerrar. Cerrar, C-E-R-R-A-R. In the present tense, which is our starting point for many of these things. In the present tense, the verb cerrar is an E to I-E stem change verb. Hopefully you can see I tried to write it small but dark. Cerrar is an E to I-E stem change verb. So whenever we're trying to make the commands, remember I said that often a good practice would be to make all or at least a portion of the conjugation box for that verb in the present tense, because we're going to be utilizing it for many things when we go through and make the affirmative, negative, blah, blah, blah. So if I wanted to make a conjugation box or a portion of it for the verb cerrar, stem change, E to IE verb, present tense cerrar, I would say yo cierro, taking into account to that E to IE stem change verb. Tú cierras, CIERRAS, and then él, ella, usted cierra, CIERRA. So when we want to make the affirmative command, close the door, cerrar meaning to close. We're making an affirmative informal to command. I have two ways to get there. Way number one would be just to steal the él, ella, usted, or the third person singular conjugation, and we would just steal what you heard me say, cierro, cierras, and then cierra, and we would just plunk down CIERRA, and that could go there, and that would be our affirmative informal to command. Or if we like option B or option 2 better, then what would we do? We would take the tu conjugation, which was cierras, CIERRAS, and are we done? No, we'll have to drop the S from the end. But whatever way we decide to do it, we end up with cierra. And so that is our affirmative informal to command. So I'm going to throw that down right here. So maybe we're in a classroom and I'm teaching you, you come in late and I say, hey, do me a favor, close the door behind you. I would say, hey, cierra la puerta. Cierra la puerta. That will be my affirmative informal to command. But maybe I don't want you to close the door. I want to say, no, never mind, don't worry about it. Leave the door open. So I want to say, don't close the door. So I will be giving you a negative informal to command. Don't close the door. And so we will remember that the first step in making a negative informal to command is forming a formal usted command, and then the second step is adding an S onto the end. So we just walk through those steps of making a formal usted command, and we would take it back to the yo conjugation of the present tense, and we would get cierro, and then we would drop the O, and the third step is we would add opposite endings to make a formal usted command. And since cerrar is an AR verb, our opposite ending for a formal usted command would be just adding the letter E. We would end up, if we were just stopping there and making a formal usted command, we would end up with CIERRE, cierre. But our second step to making a negative informal to command is taking that formal usted command and doing what? Adding an S to the end. So what I'm going to put down here is cierres, 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 obviously with the word no in front of it. So if I wanted to say to you, close the door, I will say, cierra la puerta. If I wanted to say to you as an informal to command, don't close the door, I would say to you, no cierres la puerta. Cierra la puerta, no cierres la puerta. And that is an example of, in this case, an E to IE stem change verb as an informal to command, both the affirmative and the negative commands. And then we have an example of one that you guys aren't going to like very much, because I don't know if you can see this, I put a sad face by it. The reason I put a little frowny face by the verb hacer is because just like in any tense, we have irregular verbs. And guess what? In in informal tool commands, we have irregular verbs. Hacer happens to be one of the irregular verbs. If you watched the video prior to this one, I talked to you briefly about what your irregular commands are. And when we're talking about informal tool commands, what are the irregulars? If you didn't see that, go back and watch that video. But if you have seen it and have already memorized all of your irregular verbs, then you will know what it is already. Whenever you have an irregular verb, there's nothing about going to the present tense and doing this and stealing that or adding an s or dropping an s, or for the negative, nothing about going to the, you know what I mean? It's just about memorization. For the affirmative, the affirmative informal tool commands, they just have to be memorized. There are no steps to get there. For the affirmative informal tool commands, they just have to be memorized. On the other hand, there is a way to get us to all of the negative informal tool commands by following certain steps. So we're going to do the negative together, but the affirmative of this verb hacer just has to be memorized by looking in your course materials or by looking at the video that I have for you about irregular informal commands. So the verb hacer in its affirmative for informal tool commands just has to be memorized. We can't go through any steps. We have no options other than just to memorize it. And it is this. HAZ is the irregular affirmative informal command for the verb hacer, and it is pronounced as. Careful with that one because the H's don't make a sound and the Z always makes an S sound. So we have as. If I want to say to a student, hey, do me a favor, do the homework. Do the homework. Remember, hacer meaning to do or to make. I want to say do the homework and I'm talking to one person. I would say, haz la tarea. Haz la tarea. And that is my affirmative informal command that must just be memorized because it is irregular. But my negative informal tool command with the verb hacer, we can't go through the steps. So remember that the affirmative ones are the ones that you will be memorizing, and the negative ones, we are still going through the steps. So this is where you're going to see spell change verbs come back to haunt us. So when we were looking at formal usted commands, we looked at so many different categories of formal usted commands. We looked at regular and irregular and stem change and spell change and cargazar and whatever. So this is where all of that is going to come back to haunt us. So if we need to refresh that, let's go back and watch the video on all of those conjugating different kinds of verbs as formal usted commands. Because yes, even though the affirmative informal tool command is irregular and we memorize it, in order to make the negative don't do the homework, we're going to have to form a formal usted command with the verb hacer, and then we're going to have to add an S to the end. So here's the thing. If we just kind of walk through the motions of how do I make a formal usted command with the verb hacer, let's go through the motions. How do we make a formal usted command to then be able to add an S and come up with an informal tool command that happens to be the negative command, don't do the homework? How do we do this? The verb hacer, we will have to do step number 1, which is taking it back to the yo conjugation of the present tense. Do we know what that is? If we don't and we can't figure it out like that, that might be a trigger to myself as a student that I need to go back and review present tense, honestly. So we have hacer. Step number 1 is taking it back to the yo conjugation of the present tense, which is hago, hago, H-A-G-O. Then step number 2, oh wait, before we get to step number 2, hold on. Knowing that the verb hacer all of a sudden in the yo conjugation of the present tense is hago, H-A-G-O. Since there was some crazy unexpected G that popped up, we should be able to categorize that verb as what kind of a verb? Spell change verb. Because remember, whenever we were looking at formal usted commands, we said if we have a verb in the infinitive and then we take it to the yo conjugation of the present tense and all of a sudden there's some crazy G, like in this case, or a Z, then we know that we are working under the blanket of the category of spell change verbs. So we have the verb hacer. When we took it to step number 1, yo conjugation of the present tense, we ended up with hago, H-A-G-O, because of that crazy G that appeared. We know that we have a spell change verb on our hands. And then step number 2 is we get rid of the O. So we would drop the O from hago, H-A-G-O, and end up just with H-A-G. And then step number 3 is we need to add opposite endings. So if we add the opposite ending, this was an ER verb, and the opposite ending to making a formal usted command to finally get us to being able to make an informal to command. We have H-A-G, we had opposite ending. Since that was an ER verb, the opposite ending is going to be the letter A. And as a formal usted command, which is step 1 to making a negative informal to command, it will be haga, haga, H-A-G-A. Do we stop there when we want to make a negative informal to command? No. We're not done with haga. What do we have to do? We have to add an S to the end. So all that to say that our negative informal to command is hagas, H-A-G-A-S. Obviously with the word no in front of it. So I'll put that right here. H-A-G-A-S. How did we get there? Just really quickly again is going back and to make the negative informal to command. We know that we have to make the formal usted command, and so we take it back to the yo box of the present tense. We realize that hacer is hago, H-A-G-O. Knowing that there's that crazy G that appears, we know that it's a spell change verb. Step number 2, we drop the O, we get H-A-G. Step number 3, we add opposite endings. Since hacer is an ER verb, the opposite ending would be an A. We end up with H-A-G-A, which technically with that we have formulated a formal usted command, but in order to make our negative informal to command, we had to add an S to the end of that, and that's how we end up with hagas, no hagas, H-A-G-A-S. So if I wanted to look at you and say, hey man, do me a favor, do the homework, haz la tarea. No, but you know what, never mind. Don't do the homework. No hagas la tarea. Haz la tarea, no hagas la tarea. So please keep in mind that when we look at, for example, with this one, when we look at irregular verbs that are informal to commands, the irregular verbs are going to be the affirmative ones. And you may say to me, but this looks weird, and hey, that was kind of weird too. Are those also irregular? No. The only verbs that are considered to be irregular that just have to be memorized for informal to commands are the ones in a prior video, and they are only the affirmative versions of the informal to commands. For the negative, even though it looks like, this or this did something weird, it fits into a category and we can still follow all these steps, the step 1, step 2, step 3, blah, 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 make a formal command, and then add an S to get to the negative. So no cierres is not an irregular. It just happens to be, if you're paying attention, an E to IE stem change verb categorization. And this right here, even though the affirmative is clearly irregular, that just has to be memorized for the verb hacer, the negative is not considered to be irregular. It's considered to be what because of that crazy G? Spell change. So we have 2 examples of regular verbs, both in the affirmative and in the negative. Regular informal to commands created over here with the verbs comprar and aprender. Then over here, I wanted to give you kind of like a hodgepodge little mixer upper of different kinds of verbs. So we have a stem change, E to IE verb with the verb cerrar, cierra for the affirmative, no cierres for the negative, and then this one, that's just weird all around because the affirmative for hacer as an informal to command just has to be memorized, and it is has, H-A-D, and the negative for an informal to command with the verb hacer happen to be what kind of a verb? Spell change verb. So by looking at these 4 examples, you have some examples of a variety of different verbs when we want to create informal to commands. If you ever kind of get stuck on something, you say, gosh, what do I do when it's regular? What do I do when it's stem change? What do I do when it's spell change? Look back at this video, and these examples should lead you in the right direction with this variety of verbs that we have behind me. So this is informal to commands in Spanish, both affirmative and negative.